musicians played as the ship sank. After the Titanic hit the iceberg, the captain ordered the passengers to start being put into lifeboats. To keep the passengers calm, he asked the band to play. When things began getting very hectic, the band broke up and said their goodbyes. They were going to stop playing and try to save themselves, but changed their minds. They continued playing up until the ship went underwater. It took a long time for the Titanic to sink. Although they had people looking out for icebergs, the Titanic sideswiped a huge iceberg. The ship didn't sink instantly. It took 2 hours and 40 minutes for the entire ship to sink under the surface of the ocean. This gave the crew plenty of time to get the passengers off the ship. Unfortunately, there weren't enough lifeboats for everyone on board. There weren't enough lifeboats. The Titanic was large enough to carry 64 lifeboats to save passengers if the ship were to sink. Since the ship was considered to be unsinkable, the ship's designers chose not to take up space by putting the maximum amount of lifeboats possible. The ship had only 20 lifeboats on board, which is the reason that so many of the passengers did not get off the ship safely, and most who went into the water drowned. Most of the lifeboats weren't even filled to capacity. Each lifeboat was capable of holding between 40 and 65 passengers. There were only about 20 people put into each boat. The lifeboat drill was canceled. On the night the Titanic sank, there had been many reports of ice in the water in the area from the other boats who had passed icebergs. Even with this information, the lifeboat drill was canceled. Lifeboat drills were very common on ocean liners, and there was one scheduled for the day that the Titanic sank. For reasons unknown, it was canceled by Captain Edward John Smith. The unsinkable ship had a design flaw, making it sinkable. When the Titanic was built, it was said to be unsinkable because the bulkheads were each watertight. The problem was that the water could spill from one compartment to the next. This made the ship too heavy on one side, pulling it deep into the ocean. The Titanic was huge. The length of the Titanic from bow to stern was 882 feet 9 inches. That equals the size of 2 football fields. It weighed 53,310 tons. At the time, it was the largest cruise liner ever built. The Titanic will be gone within 20 years. There is a newly discovered rust-eating bacteria called Halomonas titanicae. This bacteria will eat what is left of the Titanic on the ocean floor. Within 20 years, it will have consumed the entire remains of the ship. It was a while before the first lifeboat was released. After the Titanic struck the iceberg, the captain and the ship's designer met to figure out the extent of the damage. As soon as it was discovered that the water in the watertight bulkheads had spilled over from compartment to compartment, they decided that the ship would definitely sink. As soon as it was figured out, they started getting people ready to board the lifeboats. It was 1 hour after the collision. The water was extremely cold. The night the Titanic sunk, the water was extremely cold. It was very cold outside, and the ocean was only 28 degrees. That is 4 degrees below freezing. The temperature of the water was the main reason so many people went into the water that night and died. The discovery of the Titanic. After the Titanic sunk to the ocean floor, its remains were lost for 73 years. In 1985, a team of French and American researchers who were looking for the Titanic finally found it south of Newfoundland. Before this discovery, 3 other teams had set out in search of the ship's remains but failed. The richest man on the Titanic. The richest man on the Titanic was a man named John Jacob Astor. At the time, he was worth $87 million, which equals to $2.16 billion today. He was recently divorced and then married an 18-year-old girl. There was a huge scandal after he remarried so quickly to someone so young, so he decided to get away. He took his new wife, Madeline, traveling through Egypt and Europe. During their trip, Madeline got pregnant. She wanted to have the baby in the United States, so they boarded the Titanic. Madeline, her nurse, and her maid survived. Unfortunately, John did not. He was last seen a half hour before the ship went under the ocean smoking a cigarette with an American journalist named Jacques Futrelle. According to several reports, he could have got on a lifeboat. However, he gave up his seat to a woman and her daughter. There is another story that he gave up his seat to 2 terrified little girls. Many bodies were never found. This is one of the most haunting facts about the Titanic. When the Titanic sunk, over 1,500 people passed away. Sadly, only 306 bodies were ever found.